Thank you, Dr. Mishra, for finding time to be here with us. It's an important occasion. You were not here in the morning. This is an occasion where Business Standard is celebrating its 50 years of its publication, and we try to discuss issues, subjects that are of global and Indian concern. So what my first, question to you, Dr. Mishra, would be, from your vantage point, how do you really assess the global challenges that the Indian economy faces right now, and how do you think India should negotiate these? You have a Trump on this side, you have a Putin on the other. Xi is not keeping quiet these days. Europe, you yourself, you have to deal with the European who are here, very much here in the city. So how do you see these global challenges, and India should negotiate these challenges? Dr. Mishra.
Thank you. You can hear? Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya. I congratulate you and also the Business Standard for completing 50 years. It's a privilege for me to be among such luminaries and people who are distinguished in various fields. The question you asked, that how India should navigate in this uncertain world, particularly the recent development in the USA. Before I come to some of the specifics in the context of the Trump II administration, we should look at it, uncertainty in a much broader context, and how we have actually navigated it during the last few years, particularly 4 or 5 years since the COVID. The COVID-19 actually was really an example of how the entire world can be in a very, very uncertain situation. That was the time when the COVID-19 struck. It was very unusual in the sense that the entire world was in turmoil. All were affected. When something happens, whether it is a natural disaster or a man-made, some part of the world, some part of a country affected, but here the whole world. We didn't understand also in the beginning the nature of the pandemic, how it will emerge, how it will affect and all that. But we did navigate that turmoil. I'll tell you some steps which we took. Within a few months, I think, there was this Ukraine issue that raised another level of uncertainty. The supply chain was disrupted. So like this, we have been, and also, of course, it is not merely COVID-19, but the geopolitical issue, whether it is Ukraine, whether it is the West Asia. Even in this context also, one can talk about the energy transition, which is creating many issues for the developing countries. So with all these, it is actually a more uncertain world. Earlier, we were talking about the Sustainable Development Goal, and it was framed when the world was less uncertain. So in this context, I would like to say that COVID, how we responded to it. Of course, we had the usual measures, how to protect people, health measures and other measures. But that time, the main apprehension was that the economy will collapse, I think not only in India, but other parts of the world. I'll give only a small an example that many countries took measures such as giving stimulus packages. Many experts suggested India being a developing country, people will need more stimulus packages. We did something also, like giving free food grains and so on, and uh, uh, some sort of, not exactly loan, but interest subsidy to small enterprises. But even those days, what our Prime Minister thought, that it is an opportunity we must utilize. We introduced reform measures, several reform measures in those days. If you can see how for about a week, every day, the finance minister announced some of the reforms, which was well considered.
There were three packages.
Sorry?
There were three packages.
Three packages.
Yeah.
And even many, of course, I'll not go into the detail, but most importantly, even the sectors such as space and atomic energy also were opened up. And space, as you know now, there is significant private participation. Then also other things like opening up, then we encourage FDI, some measures were taken.
Sorry.
The corporate tax and so on. So we could withstand not only the COVID-19 but the geopolitical crisis. So we are quite confident and well equipped to face that. And of course there is protectionism, nationalism in many states, and the old, for 2 decades, everybody talked about the Washington consensus, which was actually the motto that now. Now, of course, that is dead, actually. Possibly, very recently, it is what one can call the Washington non-consensus. So I am sure that many measures we can take. Now, of course, coming to the Trump development and announcement of tariff and many other measures. For example, the reciprocal tariff. Of course, till now, not many people are clear what exactly, how it will be operated, reciprocal tariff. Even the other day, some senior ministers from UK were there. There also we discussed some of these. But the recent visit of our Prime Minister to USA and the way he handled the meetings and the joint statement, and also the agreement that it has been agreed that we will negotiate a mini trade deal. Yeah. So all these, I think, we will be able to respond effectively to the uncertain situation.
Sure. I think this is assuring to hear that there would be ways that would be found to tackle these challenges. Is that question about protectionism? There's also a question of the reciprocal tariffs, both in the US as well as the general fear is that this world will see tariff walls being created in all the major markets. Now, and you know, as I don't need to tell you this, that if trade growth does not take place the way it has taken place so far, with India's trade to GDP ratio also falling, will economic growth also be a challenge? And how do you think we should really negotiate that challenge?
Actually, this issue of protectionism and states, I think earlier, as I said, Washington consensus and this multilateral agreements, all those have been challenged not only now but also for quite some time, particularly after the Ukraine and West Asia crisis. There is a move now towards bilateral agreements, multilateral agreements, um, and also the supply chain which was disrupted. Because earlier the thinking was that uh, international trade will benefit all the parties. People will manufacture in which they have a comparative advantage. Somebody can manufacture some X commodity, somebody Y, they will, all those things. So that's how the trade and all these agreements could be useful. But now things have changed, though it will be a very suboptimal or second best at best solution. But all these agreements, like we signed FTA some time ago with Australia, UAE, EFTA, and so on, now also we are negotiating. But if you permit me, I would like to analyze all these things in a, very briefly, of course, in a
Yes.
much at a conceptual level, because
Yeah.
when we talk about policy, we can talk about whether it is trade agreement, we can talk about how to respond to, say, threats of tariff and so on, or the supply chain disruption, or the um, energy transition, where the developing country will have a trade-off between growth and climate change. Because when we talk about, very often we talk about uncertainty, but before we design a policy, we should try to analyze what exactly it is, because there has been risks for a long time. So in the economic literature, there is a distinction between risk and uncertainty. Because a situation, the risk is something in which case you can estimate the probability of an event which will affect your outcome. Whereas in case of uncertainty, you cannot estimate the probability, because suddenly something will happen. So whether it is the economic agent or a businessman or a government, the whole approach to planning, whole approach to policy has to be different. For example, in the context of COVID, because it, as if it came from nowhere, or even the Ukraine war, that same time. Earlier, in the context of disaster management, they will look at the past trend, try to project what is the probability of different scenarios. But nobody could comprehend something like COVID-19 will happen. I'm giving the example again and again because our focus is on uncertainty. It was a very uncertain situation. So now the approach to an uncertain situation has to be different from an approach to risk. So you should be prepared for the unknown. There has been, again, without sounding too academic, some analytical, some book by Taleb, an economist. He talked about anti-fragility. He said a resilient system is different from anti-fragile system, because to face uncertainty, our system should not only be resilient, but it should be anti-fragile. Okay. To give some example, a resilient system or resilient individual can resist some risk, some hazard or something. Whereas an anti-fragile, not only it can face such consequences, but can become much stronger, in the sense that innovation is an example of an anti-fragile, or for example, changing some of the whole processes. So we probably, our policy design should be, the idea should be to make the system anti-fragile. An example how to make it, for example, over years we have, the whole world is now interconnected. And more we have networking, we have connecting everything. But if something happens, the whole system can collapse. Like, for example, in a power grid, if it is well connected everywhere, one transformer failure can lead to collapse of the system. So the question is, or even the recommendation could be, let us have some more distributed system. Like that, in the context of globalization, which was dominating for quite some time, um, it was probably hyper-globalization. The whole world was connected through trade. The supply chain was also globalized. Now suddenly when the global supply chain disrupts, for example, we were importing sunflower oil from Ukraine,
That's right.
importing certain equipment from Ukraine. We were too dependent on them, but suddenly something happened then. So how to have some safeguards, how to have some alternatives, I think these are some of the measures which, when it is in this context that our Prime Minister's approach, when he said we should be Atmanirbhar. Atmanirbhar may sound, some people criticized those days, that was just, I think, around the COVID time, that India is going back to the early decades when we talked about self-reliant. But this concept of Atmanirbharta is not exactly self-reliant. It is, we don't want to shut ourselves from the world and from other geographies. We need to be prepared. If there is a disruption in supply chain, we are able to supply, we are able to manufacture. For example, when, again, giving the example of COVID-19, we didn't have even personal PPEs, what is called personal protection equipment.
That's right.
We didn't produce in the country ventilators also that time, or maybe very, very small, and we needed it that
That's
time.
right.
So that, of course, we could organize and try to respond as much as possible. So like that, some alternative, because if the supply chain disrupts. So like that, I think we should now look at something which can change our policy design. Another example I would like to give, that when we talk about our whole policy designed for risk, there are two ways in the microeconomics also how to measure risk.
Yeah.
One is that you see both sides, loss and gain, and try to average out. That is called the expected utility hypothesis. That is one approach. Other approach is that you have to ensure that suppose a farmer's income doesn't go below a particular level, because then he will not survive. So that is called survival algorithm, in the sense that you should not do something, take some measure which will minimize your level of comfort, or your survival will be at stake. Actually, this concept was propounded in the 60s or 70s by Professor Michael Lipton, based on some empirical data from India. This is, of course, microeconomics, but some of these concepts of microeconomics, whether it can be used for macroeconomic policies, because many countries consciously or unconsciously are following actually the survival, because they have to survive. So they have to have some minimum amount of manufacturing of particular critical items. They should have minimum assured supply of rare minerals. So all these things, I think that's how, what I was trying to say earlier, that all the measures, whether it is tariff, whether it is trade, our policies should look at these conceptual aspects and have a framework in mind, not just because somebody suggested do something else. I think this is what is very important in the context of the uncertain world.
So, I mean, that kind of a framework is being thought of in the government and something is being done?
It is being, because as of now, I think many of the policies which we need to analyze, particularly in the PMO also,
Yeah.
we try to look at it in a more analytical perspective. What will be the implication of that? What will be the future of that policy? How sustainable it will be?
Yeah, yeah.
Because very often we say this is very good, this will help the people, but whether it will really help people, what is the, and it should be evidence also, what will be the impact. So that we are trying to do as much as we can,
That's
but there are many other dimensions,
That's
as you
right.
know.
You know, Dr. Mishra, you talked about bilateralism, you talked about multilateralism, the challenges to multilateralism that are coming up. In the morning session, the finance minister also talked about bilateralism, and she raised this question about whether, you know, multilateralism is facing a kind of an extinction or challenge, threat. You know, in a world where bilateralism is on the rise, multilateralism is on the wane, how do you think India should negotiate this path?
No, India, the advantage for us is India is a large country. We are one of the, in absolute terms, largest economies of the world in absolute terms. We have a large consumption base. Then we have the demographic advantage also. With all these, we should be able to sustain any pressure from outside, particularly the demand, consumption, that, and also technology, also our digital public infrastructure.
That's right.
So with that, we should be able to bargain with others, because they have to depend also on our market. So it is not a one-to-one only, both. We have some advantage, and that we should. And that's how our policy should be much more it should depend also on our conceptual analysis, our analytical ability.
So the way forward would be more effective bilateral investment treaties.
Bilateral, or even some regional, some 2-3 countries. In fact, we have, as I mentioned, gave example of some FTAs, and the very fact that for the first time to a country, the President of the European Union, then 21 commissioners of
That's right.
European Commission are visiting India, that itself signals that they look to India as an alternative or a very important player in our global economy, and in this current context of geopolitical and geo-economic uncertainty.
Is there any specific outcome that you will consider it to be a positive development? Any outcome from this visit?
Because a visit like this, of course, you cannot say that these are the agreement, these are the outcome, but the very fact that all of them are coming, I am told many of them may not know India as much earlier. So that itself exposure to India, knowing what India is like, though briefly. Then our ministries are having bilateral discussion with them.
Yeah.
So that itself will lay a foundation for a much more comprehensive cooperation in the coming days.
Right. Yeah. Let me turn to a sector of the economy which is not often discussed, but it is the heart of the economy, which is agriculture. And a lot of us probably are not fully aware that Dr. Mishra played a stellar role in strengthening India's agriculture, whether it was a question of launching the Pulses mission, or whether it was a question of managing the national food security legislation. So, Dr. Mishra, my question to you on agriculture is that you have looked at it very closely, and yet we keep complaining about a lot of problems in India's agriculture. So, what do you think? Can you give us a sense of, from your vantage point, what are the 3 fixes that you, as a policy fixes for Indian agriculture? A lot of people say investment should be raised. A lot of people say R&D should be raised. But what, in your overall view, we should do to make Indian agriculture a thriving sector which contributes even more to economic growth?
It's a good question, Mr. Bhattacharya, and also I have been associated
Yes.
both at the state level here in the earlier years. Agriculture, of course, is extremely important for a country like India, and as for many other developing countries. Many people feel that agriculture, as a country develops, agriculture will become less important. But it is still, it will continue to be very important for us. For example, if you compare 1970 or even present day, the share of agriculture in the GDP has come down from very high, I think 46, 50% to now 18%.
Yeah.
But employment, the share of workforce has not correspondingly declined. That is still quite significant, about 46% or so. One projection for 2050 says that even in 2050, that time the share of agriculture will be about 7% in the GDP, but still 27% workers will depend on agriculture. So this is one issue. But we cannot say that nothing has been done in agriculture over the few decades and last 2-3 decades and even last decade. Lot of things has been done. For example, food grain, when we were depending on external assistance, now we export. And in our export also, agriculture export is a very, very important part of that. And when we talk about agriculture, from my days in the district and state, we talk about increasing production, providing good quality seed, fertilizer, and all that agricultural productivity. So those things are going on and will go on. But as you rightly said, why there is a feeling? Because the feeling is because by nature, agriculture is risky. It has some risk. Secondly, though agriculture has developed in absolute terms, I was looking at some figure between, say, 1971 and 2003-4. The average rate of growth was 3%.
That's right.
Then after that, 2003-4 to 13-14, it was about 3.5%. But after 2014-15 until last year, it was 4.1%. So rate has increased. And of course, the last few years, 7 years, it is about 5% or so. But one thing one needs to take note of, that out of this 5% overall rate of growth, horticulture is about 7-8%, something like that. Not exact figure I cannot give, but fisheries also. So the point
and the dairy sector also.
Dairy sector. So the point is the structural change is taking place. Because very often we mix up agriculture with crop. Crop production growth will be about 2% or so. So the lesson is that we must divert to other areas like horticulture, dairy, livestock. So that is one area to increase farmers' income. The other things are there that non-farm sector plays an important role. Because we talk about non-farm sector, means something non-agriculture services in the rural areas, say a barber, a construction worker, and so on. There are research studies which show that the percentage of non-farm income, that is, say, people, the farmers who have less low, small size of land, say less than half acre, only they get 1/3 from agriculture, remaining from non-agriculture. Somebody says small marginal farmer will get about 40% or so. Large farmer get major share from agriculture because they have large land and all that. So non-farm income, how to encourage farmers to have non-farm income, what sort of activity, that is the other interesting part in agriculture. Of course, many other things the government has been taken I can talk about, but as you asked, some of the critical question is the smallholder agriculture. In fact, 3 months ago, I had delivered the C.D. Deshmukh Memorial Lecture at the Reserve Bank of India. The title was Smallholder Agriculture in the 21st Century. That is because smallholders will continue to dominate our agricultural scene. As I mentioned that there were about 70% smallholders, say in 70s or 80s. Now there are 88% are smallholder. The average holding is 1 hectare.
That's right.
Or even less. So how to make them more, how to increase their income?
Land holdings.
The other point I would like to mention, it is not peculiar to India. Globally, the number of smallholder, the percentage is there are about 604 million smallholders globally.
That's right.
In India, it's about 160 million or so. Globally also they dominate. And smallholders. In Asian countries, Japan, China, Malaysia, Indonesia also we have smallholders. So the question is the theory which was propounded by Arthur J. Lewis, a British economist, that as economic growth takes place, gradually farmers or agricultural workers will shift to industry. And the declining share of agriculture is a good sign economic development. And correspondingly, this share of workforce in the agriculture will decline. But that has not happened from Indian experience nor from the Asian experience.
Yeah.
Because that dual economic theory is not working out. Another thing I would like to mention in the context of smallholder agriculture, that there are a lot of research studies which show there is something called, known as the inverse relationship between size and productivity.
Yeah.
The small farmers are more productive, more efficient in terms of output per individual, per head or output per acre. There are, of course, why that has happened. This has been done since 70s, 80s, starting from Amartya Sen, Khusro, and many people. So the question is, if in the even next few decades we'll have large number of smallholders, if they are more productive, then where is the problem? Of course, this was also one rationale for land reform, which didn't succeed.
That's right.
So we have to live with small holders, small farmers, and we have to do something. Many things have been done. The future, what can be that we can have more technology, we can have more non-farm income, crop diversification, some of these. So these are, I think, this is how the agriculture policy, and that last budget also some of the measures suggested aimed at small.
Yes, that's right. The focus on small farming also. Let us turn to some sectoral issues. There is this view that Indian industry is not investing. And there is also this view that maybe the launch of the production-linked incentive scheme has made limited impact on getting investment on the ground. How do you look at both these issues of why Indian industry is not investing enough? And second, is the production-linked incentive scheme is the right response, and how it can be tweaked or made better, or maybe something else, maybe a fiscal incentive could be thought of? What are your views on both these issues?
The second question for the production linked incentive, the PLI is.
Yeah.
So Amitabh Kant, I can see him there. So it was introduced during the slightly, I think a few months before COVID
That's
time
right.
and
Yeah.
that. The whole idea is very often it is mixed up with some industrial incentive because it is not exactly.
Okay.
The whole idea was to encourage the entrepreneurs to start manufacturing in India of commodities which we don't have here, or some emerging technology like AC batteries, solar cells and panels, also and something like not textile, because textile we have been doing for ages, technical textile.
That's right.
Auto, of course, we are a leader also in some sense, but there are also some specialized type. So that is the objective of PLI. And I don't think it has, I think, done well. There is a lot of investment, revenue, but any such thing will take some time. There is a time lag to assess the impact. The first question which you said that about why private sector investment, of course, Mr. Kotak can tell much more, but the point is so many measures, some important measures have been taken, like in, I think, 2019, reducing corporate tax.
Yeah, manufacturing sector came down to 15%.
That is for new manufacturing. Yeah. Then public investment, which has been increased, say about 6-7 years ago, about 3 lakh crore to now 11 lakh crore. Then, of course, the recent budget to encourage consumption. So I think, and also the ease of doing business, discontinuing many of the compliances. An estimate says about 40,000 compliances, both state and center together. So I think within a short time, the impact will be felt. Okay. So that.
Okay. Let me turn to another critical issue, which is about investment not only within the country, but also from outside the country. Foreign investment is, if you look at the net FDI, it is actually being slowing rapidly. Now, there's a theory that the states, an investor looks at the state and invests in India. So he doesn't invest in India as such. So is there a way to look at attracting investment into this country through the prism of states, and by collaborating with the states in a manner that the entire idea of increasing investment into the country is achieved, that goal is achieved? In a sense, how can you have more foreign investment in collaboration with the states? Is there something being thought about in terms of a policy approach changing?
A lot of things are thought about, and you are right that ultimately much of this will depend on what the states
are doing.
And India is a very large country with a federal structure. States have also access to many of the natural resources. So Government of India has been working hard with the states. For example, they have been encouraged to reduce compliances, expedite various types of clearances. States have been encouraged to invest also, that loan grant is 50-year loan, which is more like a grant, is being given. Then there is a lot of interaction between center and states. The chief ministers interact with the prime minister. Even during COVID, you can see that there were 20-30 meetings of these chief ministers taken by the prime minister, chief secretaries. Even the Niti Aayog governing council, there are also a lot of chief ministers give their, present their best practices. So like
That's
this,
right.
lot of
Nothing
interaction is taking place. In a federal structure, of course, we have to encourage the states.
right,
And many of the schemes and other, the reform also has been linked to some of these.
That's right.
So I'm sure things
Yeah.
are improving and will improve further.
Coming to the civil services reform, I remember when you joined the PMO in 2014, the Prime Minister did talk about a lot of civil service reforms, and he even started holding meetings with senior secretaries to the Government of India. Uh, can you give us a quick, short update on what is the state of civil services reform in our country from your vantage point?
The last 10 years, lot of reforms have taken place, and that is also our focus. For example, many ministries, they have been streamlined. Starting from those early days, 14, 15, the whole system of personnel management, particularly at the senior level, that has been transformed like anything.
Okay.
Never happened in the past since independence, like choosing senior officers at the level of joint secretary and additional secretary. The process of empanelment, which couldn't have been, has been changed so much. There is more emphasis on competence, more emphasis on integrity.
So the capacity building is taken care
That
of.
is the choosing them as they are, because earlier it was based on the annual assessment report, which of course over time has become less relevant because of the some of the judicial pronouncement in the past. So there is something called 360-degree assessment,
That's right.
multi-sectoral feedback from people. And of course, the capacity building, the Karm Yogi mission,
That's
now
right.
the capacity building commission. And IGOT is a platform where they have to continuously, they can upgrade their skill.
I doubt, yeah.
So IGOT platform. So these are all very far-reaching and historical initiatives. And that has already shown its impact among the bureaucracy.
But one question which has come up is that the structure of the Prime Minister's Secretariat. How do you see that Secretariat? Is it being restructured or is it remaining? Because we had the announcement of a senior colleague of yours joining you. How do you see this structure evolving and how will it really pan out?
Though the structure, the Prime Minister's office, the structure of course has evolved over the decades and all, but this time there is no change, last 10 years in the sense, and for example, when the Prime Minister became 14, that time two senior most officers
Correct.
used to be there. After that, 19 also, two were there. Now also, so that it is a routine.
So there is it is a continuation, you're saying?
It is a continuation. There is no change at all.
Okay. Okay, we are coming to the end of our discussion, Dr. Mishra. But I cannot resist asking you this question, which is a personal question. There have been occasions where I have got calls from you on a Sunday and from your office. And I have asked your officers, and they have told me that you work on 7 days of the week. Tell us this. How do you manage to work for 7 days of the week at a time when this country has a debate over should be 80 hours a week or 40 hours a week? And how do you unwind? So I'm putting all the three questions together.
How do I advise?
Unwind.
Unwind.
In a sense, how do you relax? Because you're working all the time.
Your intelligence seems to be quite good. Of course, there is no secret about it. I do come to office all the 7 days, but not because I have been asked to do or anything, but because the weekdays, including the Saturday, there are so many meetings and so many demands on your time. So some of those the papers which requires your full attention, I try to complete so that nothing remains when the week starts. And unwinding, I am Uh, I, because it depends on the person. If you feel that the work is not a strain on you, you don't feel any pressure. So I think I have never felt, whether during the weekdays or so, I am too hard pressed, too tired or anything. On that day, there is something to unwind. So that is one thing. And secondly, uh, if you feel whatever you are doing interesting, because I have been in many, like earlier I was in the NDMA when it was National Disaster Management Authority, when it was set up.
That's right.
Similarly, in Gujarat State Disaster, that when the new organization starts, you don't have place to sit. We were starting from that Centaur Hotel in a room. So, but you still feel work is so interesting. And one more, because when I started my career in Gujarat, the first posting was a place you may not have heard of called Tharad. It is on the Pakistan border. It was a village I'm talking about 50 years ago, village those days. No town within 80 kilometers, but it was a subdivision. Those days there were no substation.
So from
sometimes
Sambalpur, you went to Thorat.
I first for training went to Surat, the best place in Gujarat, one of the better place, and very good people, good food and all. And Mr. Uday Kotak should be knowing that Surat nu Jaman and Kasi nu Maran means Surat is the best place to eat, and Kasi is the best place to die. So I started from there, but. First posting, regular posting was Tharad.
Okay.
And there will be no electricity for a week or 10 days.
Oh God.
Power fails. So you have to be. But I didn't have any problem because at home I started from a small place. And that time, I think right up to intermediate, we didn't have access to electricity.
Okay. Yeah.
Then in this case, this was also desert area. During the summer, there will be dust storm.
Okay.
So when you go to a village, you have normally it's sandy area. The road will not be there. The jeep, the tire mark will be there. When you come back, you follow that. But if there is a dust storm in between, you lose your. So that time, even office room also during summer, there will be some dust storm or some heat, wind. You don't have the fan, but if you can't close the window also, because if you close the window, it will be unbearable. So you open it, and so I never felt that I am in very disadvantaged position. In fact, one senior officer once asked me, I can help you to come to a better place. I said, I am quite comfortable. But then, of course, after some time, I was taken to Palanpur. So that, I think it is the mindset or your attitude and mental that's how you can.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mishra, for being so kind and so helpful, gracious. There are so many things that you said, but I felt that real takeaway was that work is something that you must enjoy, and it's a lesson for all youngsters, the new generation. Thank you, Dr. Mishra, once again.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.